Thank you all for being here. Given that we don't live forever, I hate to bring something up so early, you know, that's depressing, but time is very important, so thank you all for being here. Thank you, students. Thank you, TAs. Thank you, school. Thank you, department. Thank you, videographers. Thank you, production team. Thank you, Lisa and KCET. Thank you, music. Thank you, Anne-Marie, Louise, and Kylie. Thank you, remarkable colleagues who have shared your knowledge with us on previous Tuesday evenings and tonight. And thank you to our extended audience of friends, colleagues, and community. Thank you for taking the time to be here. As a land-grant institution, we acknowledge the Gabrielina Tongva people as the original caretakers of this land, and we are grateful to be visitors here. It is December 3rd, week 10. Over the past 9 weeks, we have asked 9 questions. What is a university? What is knowledge? What is justice? What is truth? What is love? What is nature? What is creativity? What is community? And what is citizenship? We have heard from experts from across the university on these subjects, and many of us have continued these conversations with one another, personally and passionately. And rather than leave with a set of answers, we've learned that for the most part, we have just simply complicated our understanding of these topics. Hopefully, through these conversations, we've raised questions about our individual and collective responsibility, our ability to manage multiple viewpoints, and listen well without canceling one another out. So today, as we reflect on these conversations, perhaps it is fitting that our last question together is, what matters? What is a life well lived? That's both a deeply personal and a profoundly communal question. In our constantly connected modern lives, barely an instant goes by when someone isn't trying to sell us on what they think matters, and are we easily swayed? How do we continue to nurture a sense of vision, possibility, and meaning amidst the daily activities of our lives? What responsibility do we bear to ourselves and to our communities? And what about celebration, pleasure, joy, and love? Do these matter? I'd like to end this introduction with words by one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, who passed away just this past year. The title of the poem is The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? That's Mary Oliver. So none of us can speak about what matters for all of us. However, tonight, we have three extraordinary guests who think a great deal about what matters from the different perspectives of their lives and work. We hope that their reflections are not only meaningful to us, but that their thoughts will keep the ball rolling on our own continued conversations about what matters. Please join me in welcoming our special guests. Thank you. So, starting right here with Kristy Edmunds. Kristy, thank you for that. We didn't know who the Kristy was, is an artist, curator, curare, is that the Latin? Educator, and the executive and artistic director of our Center for the Art of Performance. She is regarded internationally for her innovation and depth in the presentation of contemporary performing arts. Earlier this year, she was named the inaugural recipient of the Beresford Prize, which is a very particular honor, honoring a cultural practitioner who has significantly contributed to the advancement, well-being, and care of artists in society. Previously, she served as the founding executive and artistic director of the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art in Portland, Oregon, artistic director for the Melbourne International Arts Festival, deputy dean for the College of the School of Performing Arts at the University of Melbourne, and consulting artistic director for the Park Avenue Armory in New York. Please welcome Kristy Edmunds. Ali Behdad is the John Charles Hills Professor of Literature, a professor of English and Comparative Literature, and the director of the Center for Near Eastern Studies at UCLA. He has published widely on issues of travel, immigration, Orientalism, and post-colonialism. His books include Belated Travelers, Orientalism in the Age of Colonial Dissolution, A Forgetful Nation, on Immigration and Cultural Identity in the United States, and Camera Orientalis, Reflections on Photography of the Middle East. He is also the co-editor of a companion to comparative literature and photography's Orientalism, New Essays on Colonial Representation. Please join me in welcoming Ali Behdad. And finally, Michael Eselun serves as the chaplain for the Simms-Mann UCLA Center for Integrative Oncology. Recently inducted into the UCLA Semel Institute Eudaimonia Society, Michael is highly regarded as a keynote inspirational speaker and speaks extensively to healthcare professionals, patient populations, and faith communities across the country. Michael weaves stories with vulnerability, insight, and humor, stories to wrap around the deeper questions of life, mortality, and meaning. He also happens to be an alumnus of UCLA who received a degree in design. Please join me in welcoming Michael Eselun.
Thank you very much, Victoria. It's a great pleasure to be here, standing in front of you. I would like to begin with sharing with you the story of my immigration to the United States and how I became a scholar of humanities by way of contextualizing, really, how would I answer a big question, such as what matters? As a middle-class boy growing up in the Middle East in 1960s and 70s, I was given 3 career options by my parents and culture. To become an engineer, option 1, to become a doctor, option 2, or to be a failure, option 3. So you can imagine my parents' reaction when I informed them of my decision, or rather wish at that point, to become a professor of literature or to study literature. I never forget the expression of sheer horror and shock on my dad's face when I told him about my career choice. Incredulous and horrified, he tried to talk sense into me by warning me that if I majored in literature, I would ultimately be feeling inferior and resentful to my brothers, all 5 of whom, I have no sisters, all 5 of whom incidentally ended up becoming doctors, engineers, and 1 lawyer. I have 2 doctors, 2 engineers, and 1 lawyer. Think about it, son, he said. They will all have successful careers, live in great big homes, marry beautiful wives or beautiful women from good families, while you will be struggling all alone to make a meager living with your unread books and unpublished poems. I remember being very upset and feeling very misunderstood by my dad, thinking that all he cared about, all he valued was money and success. I also remember feeling a sense of superiority in believing that what really mattered to me was more than money and success. It was higher values like imagination, literature, art, philosophy, making a difference through them. But now, in retrospect, and having kids of my own, I appreciate my dad's wish for us to be successful and to have a fulfilling life. Though I still disagree with him that being a doctor is superior than being an English teacher, I can understand where he was coming from. Now, in the late 1970s, Iran was going through a major revolution, and I, as an idealist teenager, began participating in the street demonstrations that quickly became violent as Shah's military and police began shooting at demonstrators. The revolution reaffirmed or rekindled my idealism and the desire to pursue what I considered higher values. I could not help by thinking that what really mattered were ideals such as freedom of expression, economic equality, social justice. My parents were, of course, very worried and upset about my participating in the street demonstration. They were rightfully fearful that I would be killed by the Shah's police, which in fact killed many demonstrators in the late 1970s. But there too, I was of course mad at them for preventing me from participating in the revolution, thinking that they really did not care about what I considered universal values, such as liberty, equality, justice, and so on. But in retrospect, I now appreciate that for them, safety mattered, and that their admonitions were coming from a place of love, not cowardice. I remember my mother telling me that there are 2 fundamental values that you do not appreciate until you lose them: security and health. Now, on September 8, 1978, the day after Shah declared martial law, his security forces killed a large group of demonstrators in the Jaleh Square, killing more than 100 people. We don't know exactly how many. After what became known as the Black Friday, my parents decided to send me, their reckless, revolutionary, idealist son, out of the country. They quickly secured an admission from a Catholic high school in Lincoln, Nebraska, of all places. And so began what I perceived to be my exile. And then, of course, I now appreciate it as an immigration experience of coming to the United States. I arrived in Lincoln, Nebraska on a cold, snowy January day. I never forget, January 7, 1979. This was the first time I had left Iran. I remember looking out from the window, the snow-covered, flat landscape as the plane was making its landing, thinking, discombobulated as I was, that I was being exiled to Siberia. In my imagination, America was about California beaches and New York high-rises, nothing in the middle. I didn't know Midwest existed, and I had no idea that it was so flat. The Nebraskans were initially friendly towards me, treating me like an exotic and rich other. They would ask me, do your parents own oil fields? What is it like to ride a camel? They had no idea of the cosmopolitan Tehran of the late 1970s with its fashionable boutiques and ski resorts in the Alborz Mountain. By the way, I've never seen a camel in my life until that time. Now, this exotic fascination, however, turned into a violent form of racism 10 months later, when on November 4th, 1979, 52 American diplomats were taken hostage by the revolutionary people. I never forget, for example, a cold autumn night in 1979, while working on a writing paper, a writing assignment in my dormitory, I was startled by the belligerent voice of two fellow students who started shouting anti-Islamic and anti-Iranian slogans. Soon, their violent words were accompanied by sounds of dart sinking into my door. This was the first time that I experienced racism. I had read about racism as a revolutionary kid because we were reading Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, but I had never really experienced it. Iran, for the most part, is a very homogeneous kind of a country. But to be subjected to it was a completely different experience. And so for the next 444 days, I too was a hostage, but in America. Not that I needed any more incentive, but my experience of Iranian revolution and the hostage crisis confirmed my belief in humanism and the pursuit of humanistic or humanities. Hence my becoming an English professor or a professor of comparative literature. Now fast forward to a couple months ago when I was asked by Victoria to participate in this panel. Although I knew in general ways how I would answer the question as a humanist, I thought it would make a nice dinner conversation by posing the question to my family. During what became a fascinating conversation, my son David, who is a junior in the humanities magnet at Hamilton High, provided what to me was a great answer to the question posed. What matters, he said, is what human beings think matter. What matters, in other words, he was suggesting, is a human construct. And when we say what matters, we mean by it a certain perceived value. Now, like my son, as a scholar of humanities, I too see the question of what matters as an invitation to inquire into the structures and belief systems that create certain things as valuable or valueless. And what this means is that to the extent to which we all come from different backgrounds and we have different histories, different things matter to each of us. So for example, for my yoga teacher, what matters is love. For the rich clientele who take his classes at Equinox, what matters is fitness, right? For our chancellor, probably what matters is public education. For the dean of law school that you probably met in an earlier, I know you met in an earlier panel, what matters is justice. For my wife, who happens to be a professor of gender studies, what matters is gender equality and gender neutrality. For an immigration activist like Cristina Jimenez, what matters is citizenship and the protection of undocumented immigrants. You get the point, right? There's a plurality of values that matter to different people. And in fact, all the topics that you have dealt in the last 9 weeks really could be an answer to this question tonight. Now, what the humanities help us appreciate is precisely this very simple fact. Simple but profound, that the plurality of things matter. But the humanities also provide us with a conceptual framework to handle the plurality of interests and ideals by attending to the question of how can we live together harmoniously, hopefully, in a society with people with different and sometimes divergent backgrounds. Many thinkers and scholars of humanities have pondered this question, And the most compelling answer has come from, is really what they've suggested is the idea of pluralism. Now, what is pluralism? Pluralism, as Isaiah Berlin defines it, is the recognition that human goals are many, none of them commensurable and in perpetual rivalry with one another. Pluralism is the opposite of monoism, which is the doctrine that denies the existence of differences, claiming that only one set of values is true and the other values are all false. Pluralism also is very different from relativism. That is the doctrine that truth and morality are culturally, personally, and historically contingent. The idea that my values are mine, yours are yours, and if we clash, too bad, neither of us can claim to be right. Here's a quote from Berlin in his last essay, which explains this distinction. He says, I came to the conclusion that there's a plurality of ideals as there is a plurality of cultures and temperaments. I am not a relativist. I do not say I like my coffee with milk and you like it without. I'm in favor of kindness and you prefer concentration camps. Each of us with his own values which cannot be overcome or integrated. This, I believe, is to be false. But I do believe that there is a plurality of values which men or women can seek and that these values differ. What philosophers and scholars of humanity like Berlin teach us is that there are many values and therefore many things that matter. And that many of the values are not only incompatible, but also incommensurable. Think about it. Sometimes these values come into conflict with another. And when they come into conflict, doesn't mean that one value is superior than the other one, or is better, or is more true. Think about it. Liberty can come into conflict with equality and public order. Love can conflict with impartiality and fairness. Mercy can conflict with justice. Knowledge can conflict with happiness. Spontaneity and free-spiritedness can conflict with dependability and respectability. You get the point, right? Pluralism involves conflict and therefore choices. And this is the key word. Not only between different values in individual cases, but also between different ways of life. Choice is essential to human self, to human condition. Choice is what makes us human. And being conscious of the choices we make and really thoughtfully attending to their consequences is crucial to the idea of pluralism and the possibility of living together harmoniously in a plural society. Thank you. Namaste.
When I first told my husband, Scott, about this 10 Questions project and that I had been invited to speak, oops, lost my mic. Hang on. I think I got it.
Yeah.
Okay. We're good. Anyway, when I first told my husband, Scott, about this 10 Questions project and that I had been invited to speak to one of the questions, he of course asked me which one. What matters, I said. Oh, he said, everything and nothing, and then he left the room. Pithy, but true in a way, everything and nothing. For anyone who watched the Democratic presidential debates a few weeks ago, we saw 10 different versions of what matters. Day one of my administration will be addressing climate change. Day one for me will be the healthcare crisis, and day one for me will be addressing the corruption in Washington. And it all matters. But you know what else matters? That you all get home safely tonight, that the cat's been fed, that I have clean underwear for tomorrow. Perhaps ultimately what matters most is the thing that's right in front of us, this very moment. I remember in 1981 reading a magazine interview with Rosalind Carter, not long after she and Jimmy had moved out of the White House and back home to Plains, Georgia. At the time of the interview, she was busily laying a brick pathway up to the front porch of their house. She marveled at the absurdity to realize that several months earlier, she had been living in the White House, hosting state dinners, Camp David Peace Accord, all of that. And now the most important thing in the world is that this brick is straight. And it's true, she said, that is important. Though I was still a very young man, I was so struck by the profundity of that, so much so that I still remember it nearly 40 years later. It's kind of Zen-like, isn't it? Around the same time, I had taken a weekend self-development seminar or another and was given the assignment to write my own epitaph. For any of you who have not done that task, I encourage it. It's a daunting task. It becomes even more daunting when we have to do it for real. My mom died earlier this year. Those little bronze plaques are pretty small. There isn't room for many words. Which words will you choose that matter, that will capture the essence of an entire human life? What I chose for myself in my 20s was he was moved by life. I think what matters is fluid and changeable over the course of a lifetime, even over the course of a day or an afternoon. What mattered to me at 25 has nothing to do really with what mattered to me at 45, which bears little resemblance to what matters to me today at 65. I think in the first half of life, we're so focused on achieving something, accomplishing our goals, making a difference, making some money, getting stuff, perhaps raising a family. Second half of life, it's a different story. But one inescapable truth for nearly everyone, but precious few of us, a few generations from now, no one will know or remember or care that you even walked the earth. So, given that reality, what matters? I come back to Rosalind Carter, that the bricks are straight. Yes, I have to focus on this that's right in front of me, but I also have to be mindful and pay attention to all those other global issues that affect us all, that affect the planet. But when I'm breathing my last breath, what will I say matters then? In my work as an oncology chaplain, I would say that I'm sort of in the coming out business. I'm creating a safe space for people to come out to me, to tell me their truth, often the deepest truth of their lives, and often at the most critical times of their lives, at the end of it. But it's not only a coming out business, it's also a meaning-making business, because once that truth's out there, how do we make sense of it? How do we decide what matters? That's part of the gift and the exhilaration of doing this work, is that I get that daily reminder. Pay attention, Michael, particularly now as I'm well into the third act of my life. When I reflect on Acts 1 and 2, those earlier versions of myself, I realize how seldom it was that I was ever focused on the bricks. I always had an eye and an ear open to what's the next thing, how will this decision affect that, which school should I choose, which major should I choose, which classes should I take, which job should I take, which relationships should I nurture that are going to lead me to this place I think I want to go. And that's maybe still true in a way, but perhaps with a lot less urgency. But in some ways, perhaps even with more urgency, because in the grand scheme of things, the big what's next for me now is the home stretch, the final reckoning, as it were. So what is it that I want to be able to say about my life when I'm taking my last breath? There are, of course, no textbook answers for that question, and there are as many uniquely individual answers as there are people on the planet. But I do hear often some common answers, particularly as folks are struggling with, do I really want to go on this phase 1 drug trial and know that I'm going to suffer like a dog for the chance of a couple more months of life? What makes life worth fighting for? So I hear from parents mostly, I want to live to see my kid graduate, I want to live to walk my daughter down the aisle on her wedding day. I want to see my grandchild be born. But those are deceptively simple, compact, tidy answers. I remember many years ago having a leukemia patient, Leon, who was in the hospital for weeks and weeks. I went to visit him regularly. Leon was a very prickly fellow, not likable at all. In all those weeks of visiting him in the hospital, I never saw that he had any visitors. No family or friends came to see him, and he was kind of proud of that. I don't need anybody, he would say. He had his own business, and he had a dog who scared the neighbors. Leon really seemed to enjoy sparring with me philosophically, duking it out. He identified as an atheist, a secular Jew, and presumed I was religious and a Christian, neither of which are true, but he enjoyed duking it out with me about philosophy. After his bone marrow transplant, he went south very quickly. The doctors came in and gave him that awful assessment. There's nothing more we can do. Then the facade began to crack, and the tears came. But the very next day, the docs came in and said, wait. There's this new drug trial that you just might qualify for. Maybe we should give it a try. His spirits went through the roof. Mine too. Leon, this is great news. Tell me, what will you do with more time if you get it? I eagerly wanted to know. Here's the very nexus of this question. What matters? I'd like to finish my invoicing, he said. My heart just sank. In total disappointment and judgment, I admit. I was not a good chaplain in that moment. I didn't ask the next obvious question. Oh, really? Tell me, why are your invoices so important to you? No, I just sat there in stunned silence and disappointment. Really, I was hoping he would say, I'd like to walk my dog on the beach one more time. I'd like to see another beautiful sunset. I'd like to hear Rhapsody in Blue one more time. No, I'd like to finish my invoicing. That's what mattered to Leon. Marianne was in her late 40s. She had lived the previous 4 years with pancreatic cancer, and I had walked the last 6 months of her journey beside her. Not long before she died, I went to see her in the hospital, and she was just cooked, fried, ready to toss it all in. I can't do this anymore. But it wasn't even an option because her family wouldn't hear of it. Her husband, her kids, of course, wanted her to get the second opinion, try the next procedure, try the drug trial, anything. And her spiritual struggle was, are my kids going to think I didn't love them enough to keep fighting? Are they going to think that their mom quit on them? Marianne, if it were up to you, what would you choose right now? I'd disconnect all these pumps and hoses. I'd ask my husband to get in bed with me right here and hold me and look out the window of my hospital room and say, look at that leaf on that tree. Look at how it catches the sunlight. Look at how it wavers in the breeze. Isn't that beautiful? A God moment, she would call it. In our months of conversation, she told me about some other God moments, moments in which not much happened at all, but a complete awareness of presence, of this moment, is enough. I'd like one more God moment, she said. That's what mattered. Eselun, I met on her first day of chemotherapy after having been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She came to see me regularly over the next 6 years for individual sessions, though she never wanted to talk about anything of any greater consequence than what she and her husband had done the previous weekend. Despite all my efforts and invitation to kind of hold the door open for her to talk about the deeper issues and themes that might be coming down the pike, oh, Michael, she never took the bait. I always feel so much better after talking to you. I went to see her in the hospital the day before she died. Her husband, Gene, was there. They'd been together just forever, 50 years, high school sweethearts, no kids. The Buddhists think it's a good idea to be reflecting on the sweet memories of life when we're about to pass away, that it somehow greases the wheels, perhaps, for the next incarnation. Whether we believe in that or not, it's not a bad idea. Gene, tell me again the story of how you guys met. I love that. How did it go? Oh, sure. And he launches into the story, and soon enough, Evelyn is getting very distressed and even a little irritated. She doesn't remember. Undaunted, he says, oh, sure you do, honey. Remember we went to that football game and our friends were in the back seat? No. The memory was gone. So he gave up and said, oh, that's okay, honey, you're tired. Maybe you just want to sleep. Michael and we'll go out in the hall and we'll chat and give you a chance to rest, okay? No, she said, I want you both here. I just don't want anybody to talk. And so I sat on one side of the bed, Gene sat on the other, and we each held a hand. And we just sat there in silence. It was one of the most profoundly intimate, sacred moments of my life. There is nothing left to say or do. Perhaps what matters is what's left when everything that we thought had mattered had burnt away. So what is it that matters to me today, right now? This conversation matters. Relationship matters. Connection matters. Friendship matters. Kindness matters. Witnessing one another. I see you, you see me. That matters. Communion matters. An old-fashioned religious word, but I love it. I love the imagery of it. I'm going to take in and ingest and digest this common humanity we share, this oneness, this connection with all of life, with nature, with the source of life itself, the sweetness and the pain of it. Of course, when I'm taking my last breath, I would like to be able to say, I imagine that I made a difference. I relieved some suffering. I fostered some communion. I had a blast. I did a lot of great stuff. I saw the world. I loved hard. I would like to be able to say all that, but I'm not so delusional or filled with such grandiosity to think that that was ever more than just one conversation at a time, one brick at a time. Joseph Campbell says it's important to connect with the eternal within, that it's important to participate with joy in the sorrows of the world. I love that. I come back to that again and again. Participate with joy in the sorrows of the world. But maybe it just comes down to being moved by life. Thank you.
Woo! I got all kinds of things down here. I've just brought my desk to you. Yes. Are we okay? Yeah.
Yeah, deep breath.
Yeah. I knew it was going to happen when you talked, that I was going to lose it. Okay. Here's a few things. I'll start on the small, around what matters. The pottery bowl that someone once made. Being asked to come outside and play before dinner. Dinner. Firelight and sparks in the smoke. Being beloved to someone. The weather. The dog we named but weren't allowed to take home. A feather. A hat, a web. Riding the blue bike with the banana seat, successfully. A bath that fixed everything. That ladybug on my finger from when I was 3. The shape of the wing. a rush of inspiration. You know that one, right? The swing in the park that doesn't squeak. The plane landing. Deciding finally. The poem. Knowing that the person in charge had absolutely no idea. Joy. The last tear shed on that particular subject. Done. A real chance. A real chance. The patch of sun on the coffee table. Those hands, having taken up the effort. Having no plans. Soup. The smile on that face. Going forth anyway. To love so much. The close of a ragged day. Having learned so much through these years. When the bus driver waved at us on the first day of school. How things turned out. Wearing only one sock out in the backyard or out to collect the mail. The big winter tree. When that person finally stopped talking. Having the exact change. Being amazed by something so ordinary. Making the train. Reading a perfect sentence. Hearing that song. Sidestepping a complete catastrophe. Finding that right cafe in a foreign city. There are so many beautiful people. One dandelion can do so much. Living in support of one another's potential. The ocean every single day. Feeling wholly understood for a second. A green praying mantis. Your birthday. All of the candles now. You. Those are things that matter. Here's an interesting that mattered a lot to someone who wrote to me recently, and I'm just going to share it because it's a different way of mattering and finding matter and making meaning. This is the email I received. This is to advise you that a central administration fee, CAF, is scheduled to be charged to the following FAU accounts for the FY 2019-2020 support of EOL. This is your bill. The recharge fee was approved by AP and B in accordance with the standards set out by Policy 340. If you have any questions about the corresponding fund numbers, please contact APB. Sincerely. This is part of your life in the arts, and I want you to get used to it, students, right away. So usually those are the moments where I have a tendency towards the delete button, but I thought somebody used a lot of acronyms to tell me that I owed some department I've never heard of $60. It mattered to whoever this person was that the message was received by me. So I decided to write this person back. Because right then, that mattered a lot to me. Hello. I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to do with this information. I'm a little unclear about what's driving this recharge or what service I might have, unbeknownst to me, expended $60 on. Is this new charge mandatory? Thanks, sincerely, Christy. The response back, oh, the basis for our recharges are outlined in Policy 340. We received the eligible rechargee list for FY 2019-2020 from APB attached. Even though your program doesn't use EOL, you are on the eligible rechargee list, and we are allowed by APB to charge it. Hope this answers your questions. Best. And so it goes. And we continued our correspondence. And in the end, I sent her a poem. I'd made the connection. I appreciated it. I found out every single department on the list that doesn't use the service provided that we can all be recharged for. But I appreciated, and she appreciated, that there was somebody I didn't know who had the Policy 340 right to charge me and my department something. And once we got through the acronyms, and once we got through all of that, it basically was her job to make sure that a common service inside a public university was spread across everyone's shoulders on a calculus that is beyond me to this day, but nonetheless is part of the common good. And so if that was happening and it was helping biology, and I'm running Royce Hall, and I don't use it, but I'm on the list, it's helping someone. And she thought that perspective made her job matter more. And that mattered to me. I come from a family, my mother was born on an Indian reservation in Washington State, the Colville Reservation. She was raised in a small trailer until the age of 8. Her little brother came along. Imagine it, right? I was not raised in the tradition of the reservation myself, but it's in my ancestry. And so I have kin through Native culture. Inside of that culture is always something around a different kind of sensibility of a duty of care. It's always a manageable scale, actually. It's a manageable scale of care. It's not the kind of assignment of carrying the whole entire world on your shoulders. It's the kind of duty of care that's scalable to the human being, to the soul of our capacities, and that we can find avenues through taking responsibility. My father's side were migrant workers. He was an apple picker. I learned how to pick apples. I won't tell you that whole story. But part of that side of the family was a side of the family, too, where I had to, by the age of 3 or 4, know how to pick an apple because I would be expected to help at harvest. And the thing about that is that the best way to pick an apple is not how many you get for the money, how many you can shove into a box and haul up to the landowner to get your cash for the day, although that's vital to your survival. It's that you make sure you carefully pick the apple so that it will blossom next year for the family that will come through and the migrant community that will need those trees. Here's the poem I sent, Sylvia. And I think this matters, and it's part of my family, by Will Allen Dromduel. You guys might know this. An old man going a lone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm vast and deep and wide, through which was flowing a sullen tide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim. The sullen stream had no fear for him, but he turned when safe on the other side and built a bridge to span the tide. "Old man," said a fellow pilgrim near, "you are wasting your strength with building here. Your journey will end with this ending day. You never again will pass this way. You've crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why build this bridge at evening tide?" And the builder lifted his old gray head. "Good friend, in the path I have come," he said, "there followed after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. this chasm that has been not to me, to that fair, dark-haired youth may a pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I am building this bridge for him. That matters.
I think we're all going to take a few, not a break, just so you know, but a few moments to take some deep breaths and just stay with these beautiful offerings that have been given to us. Maybe just talk about some of the moments that are lingering right now. For myself, clearly, is the sense in which, I'm going to just jump in there.
Yeah, get on. That was a quick
fill
breath
that
we
void.
just had
Fill
there.
that void. Yeah. Clearly, that's what matters right now. Fill the void. No, it's just the way in which these things that we associate with value, objects, your parents' generation, which now we're at that moment in time, the safety and success or whatever it is. Clearly what has come up over and over again is that these are the things that don't typically get valued in our everyday lives or in this world of commodities and trajectories and so on. And you know, your poem, Christy, too, was just as Michael's remembrances of some of those folks were about the present moment.
Yeah.
The present moment. So that's one of my thoughts.
What was so wonderful about both of your presentations? First of all, you were both storytellers and poets, and I felt almost insecure and awkward. Like, I'm a professor of literature, and you are the poets and writers and storytellers. Is what I kind of got from both of your presentations is that really what matters are these kind of ordinary things that we don't even think about what matters. I mean, for example, for the kind of issues that I was bringing up, justice, equality and liberty and so on. So, and I think that this is something that I was wondering if you could say more about, the sort of how the ordinary really matters, the kind of things that we don't think about it at all. These kind of little, leaves falling down from a tree that you live all your life and don't think about it until there's a moment. So is it really the kind of the crisis of when you kind of in a way recognize, as my mom would say, kind of health really matters or being alive really matters in ways that you don't think about it walking around. You don't think about that.
I don't think it's an either-or kind of value of either these grand ideas matter or the everyday matters, but it's a both and. As you were talking, I was thinking about how many, I have no military experience whatsoever, but how many times I've heard veterans talk about that they were not at all concerned about why they were fighting the war, particularly in a war that's as dubious as the Iraq War or something, but what mattered was the relationship with the guy next to me. And that was the thing that mattered. And yes, maybe the purpose of the war matters. I see it, I've had kind of a circuitous life path. I was a professional dancer as a young man. I was many years as a designer, but I also ran a nonprofit speakers bureau addressing homophobia here in Los Angeles for 25 years. And we could say when we were crafting our vision statement, this very lofty goal, the world will be a welcoming place because of the work we do, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, right. It's one conversation at a time, and you do the work and you think you're making a difference, but it's the one kid who comes up and gets you on your way back to the parking garage, who has a conversation, wants to tell you about his dad and his struggle. That is what mattered. Yes, that we created the organization. Yes, we made a global difference, I think, at least in Los Angeles. But what I remember are those one-on-one, it's the one conversation, the one connection at a time. I just think they both go together.
Yeah. I mean, yes, can I say that justice, equitable, all these very large things matter immensely and inordinately. But I feel like they can also become very abstract because they're very unevenly distributed. There are things, I work obviously in the arts, so there are things in which I will recognize, and I've worked my entire life with artists in different art forms, different capacities. There's something around the endeavor of that labor that does address these things: justice, equity, to be awake to the world uniquely, to be awake differently. But often it comes through something smaller, the something smaller so that we can find bond. When I would say things in that part about rattling off things that, the bath that makes everything better, or some of you connect to it, I feel that that connection happens. That connection makes some kind of a bond. Art is made in the context of human heritage to generate a kind of way to create neighborliness and kinship through that which is sublime, or to shake us awake to our lack of bond that fuels towards aspects of justice, aspects of that depth of humanity, that obliteration of racism, the gender inequity. These things are huge, but so too is a sense of shelter, a sense of belonging, health, health, of course. And also, as you get towards the end of your life, I lost my mother this year as well, the health was now not going to, that was not it. She was moving towards her horizon line, and it was very clear as we would talk. She would say, I'm not afraid to die, but damn, it's going to be hell getting out of here. And I'm not looking forward to that. And 2 months later, out of complete the blue, she was gone. Health at that point was not what mattered now. She was past health. Health was not an option. What mattered was that she could have her own autonomous dignity through which to pass through that death, and that I could be present for her. Right? And then there's the things of value. The death of my mother has also changed me. My cells are different. My way of being is different. I recognize that that kind of grief that now lives in me as a kind of constant companion, as love might do in other ways, is different. And it makes me feel very profoundly honest about where do I want to put my life force. Where do we put our life force? There's an artist, his name's Jim Hodges. Many of you a few years ago may have seen billboards around the city, or they did an exhibition of his work at the Hammer Museum. And he chose to title it, Give More Than You Take. He chose to title it Give More Than You Take so that it would become a public messaging service while his exhibition was being advertised. It mattered to him to create a public way of saying that is probably the best way to understand why he makes the art he makes and what he endeavors to do with his life force. You know what I mean? And I get to work and stand alongside of the shoulders of people who are doing those kinds of bodies of work in any different kind of art form that I think makes us feel awake to even the concept of justice if it's been rescinded from us, if it has seemed unavailable, things like that. This part of how people pursue these expressive truths to offer them up into the world through a very unique, sometimes abstract and idiosyncratic language, system, movement. How do you care about 0 and 1 if you can't perceive the infinite potential between 0 and 1? The space between the notes matters as much as the notes that are hit. The stillnesses in a choreography matter as much as the movement and where they land. The breath between the words on a stage from an actor, the exits matter as much as the entrances. Those kinds of things. And when you knit the ability to perceive these interdependencies, then I think justice makes sense and equity becomes desired. And the relinquishing of self to be living in the possibility of one another's potential and trying to elevate it in the deepest way we can be anything from you didn't have enough change at the grocery line and you helped someone. That neighborliness makes a difference to these bigger things.
I want to just shift the register a tiny bit, because I feel like when we're talking about passing through and passing over those moments of what matters, or the story we're able to tell about ourselves, is one really extraordinary thing. But I think a lot of us spend a lot of time, maybe not you, but this question of what is a good life? Like, here I am in the middle of my life, and what matters now? Does that resonate for any of you all? I saw one nod. Okay.
You're affirmed.
Thank you. But I wonder if you could just, either take that apart a little bit, like this moral idea about a life and how it relates to these larger questions of justice and what are we doing to make life better? How do we manage our smallness in the largeness of things? I wonder if you all would help me out with that.
You want to jump in, Ali? I'd love to hear the contrast. You come from such competing cultures and values.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the questions I've been sort of thinking about in terms of when we pose that question of what matters, there are different ways that the sort of accent can be put in. For example, people would say, an African-American scholar has written about this, Cornel West, race matters.
Yeah.
So when he says race matters, and you have the same thing by feminists who are saying gender matters, right? Bodies matter, Judith Butler's kind of a thing. That, I think it raises a different question about what matters than the way, for example, we in some ways or have been talking about what matters as values. When Cornel West says race matters, he's not saying, race is important and it's in a value. He knows that race is a construction.
Yeah.
But I think we need, in thinking about what matters, we need to attend, I think, especially for people like us here in this kind of environment, in a kind of a university setting, to the kind of ways that people like Cornel West and Judith Butler and others raise this kind of a point, to attend to the implications of certain categories that have been created for us. And I think as human beings, we are in some ways always sort of, theorists will say, interpolated by these kind of issues that, that come up. So I think that that's, for me, is an important, as a scholar, as a thinker, really, what are the implications of some of these kind of categories that were created? And I think that, so that's one issue that I think is very important to attend to in terms of raising this question. The other issue that, as I was listening to your beautiful presentations, and I was very moved, obviously, as I'm sure everyone was, I was sort of remembering, the kind of contexts where it would have been nice if people could say really that what matters to them, because they don't have the kind of privileges and the kind of lives that we have in the, say, first world, coming from the third world myself, that, there is a certain kind of a privilege, there is a kind of a certain, the basics that allows us to think about certain things that matter or not. Every day that I go to my fancy gym in Equinox, I pass this massive number of tents that I'm sure are just in this next street. And I mean, I'm torn in that moment as I'm driving to this place. You know, here I am spending all this money in my gym, and sometimes I say, maybe I shouldn't just run in the street or something instead of paying my money to this organization that I didn't even believe in to help these people. And so, you see what I'm trying to get at? Yes, you know, that the kind of you know, our sort of context is, we have to attend to those questions if we are to make a difference, if we are to really, you know, answer this question in a meaningful and effective way, rather than a kind of a purely individualist sort of way. Am I making sense? I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and at what point do you, not to place this story, you know, about the Equinox Gym, but at what point do we take responsibility for the inequity, to register, you know, like, well, I could live on half the income that I have. I could give that other half of my income to a place where it will make a difference in the world. And in doing that, would my life be better? Maybe. It's a scary thought, because it's so easy to want to be comfortable.
Yeah. And that kind of embracing that sort of foundational, sort of the existential question, you know, that really matters.
I think when it's right in front of us, like I guess another question is that we're living in a world that is so big all the time. Like, you know what's happening, or could know what's happening everywhere. So what is the sphere of influence? What does that matter? Like, where do you place your actions? You know, like you and your loved ones, or you and your community, or you and, like...
Yes. I again come back to the both and thing. I can't contain it all, and I'm not an academic, so I don't, but I do have to hold this complexity that I can, at times, be visiting with a patient on their deathbed and feel like I am so, at the moment, this is what matters, and I can go out to my car and look down and say, shit, I got a spot on these pants. And I just took them to the cleaners. And I can get kind of upset about that. And then I can really judge myself. Like, what? Look at what you're privileged to be able to do in this work, and you're going to focus even for a nanosecond on your pants. And then I suffer more, and then I think, is that the goal? And what I come to, and it may be a little too facile, but that we live in multiple worlds at the same time. And for me, a piece of imagery that I've used before is like a wall in Best Buy of a bunch of TV screens, each one tuned to a different show. There's a gazillion shows going on. And I'm in a lot of them, and in a lot of them, I'm in none of them. And each show doesn't have any moral superiority than another one. It just is the world. It's the context that it is, with its own goals, its own value system. It's silly to judge a cartoon by the standards of, I don't know, PBS NewsHour. I mean, they're different universes. So I'm in this TV show where my clean pants matter and the cost to clean them matters, and I'm in a TV show where life and love in this moment is all that matters. Can I just hold my heart open large enough to contain all those shows and not use it as a weapon to beat myself up for not being focused on the right show in the right moment? That there's all these shows going on, and there's global warming, and then there's Black Lives Matter, and no, all lives matter, and then, what are you talking about? And there's a sign at the Unitarian Church in Santa Monica that has Black Lives Matter that's been vandalized time and time again in Santa Monica. What is our issue with just saying that we have such things as identity, and that matters? And yes, we're all one, but I also want you to understand that I have difference, I have privilege, there's places I don't have privilege. In all my years of speaking for Glide about homophobia, in the early years, this would have been maybe late 80s, early 90s, if somebody said after an engagement, oh, I see, you're just like me, except for who you love, I thought I hit a home run. And now, if somebody says, I feel like I missed, no, I don't want you to hear that I'm just like you, maybe in this ultimate spiritual sense, but I want you to hear that this was a profoundly different path growing up as a gay child in this culture than it is of one who has heterosexual privilege. And I want you to hear that difference. Mm-hmm. So there again is the both and.
Yeah, there is a really great story. I mean, it kind of relate to what you're saying about this kind of the way you want people to understand that sort of a difference, which I think is a really good story. I always like to tell it. You know, when Gandhi was living, there was all these kind of riots, Hindu and Muslim riots. So one day he's sitting there, and a Hindu, one of the people comes to him and says, you know, my son just got murdered. There was riots, people killing each other, Muslims and Hindus, and Gandhi goes to Gandhi and says, you know, a Muslim murdered my child. I am so angry. I want to destroy all the Muslims. I am, you know, outraged. What can you tell me? What can you help me to deal with this rage? And obviously, we don't want to kill people and so on. And Gandhi thinks for a second and says, you know, go adopt a boy who has lost his family during these riots and raise him like a Muslim. Not like a Hindu, like a Muslim. This is the kind of the level of understanding that I think we have in terms of these, I think, higher values. And in terms of our kind of subjectivity, this kind of, to really recognize the alterity of this other person in the full alterity, in full otherness, rather than trying to do the sameness. Sameness is an incredibly dangerous kind of phenomenon that is foundational to sort of Western metaphysics, right? And I think that what, to me, is important to come to term or understand, really in a profound way, that's what I think you're saying, is these kind of recognition of that very fundamental difference that I don't even have access to. Yes, you're absolutely right.
I don't think we can get to know that we are all one unless first I know what it's like to be you. There's no free pass to jump to that place. Oh, we're all one, we all love each other. I remember going to my, 40th high school reunion and talking about some of my work with Glide, and this one woman, when I talked about some of the feeling different in high school, which was a almost exclusively white high school in Long Beach. Oh, well, we just loved everybody then. It was just great, wasn't it? I mean, just clueless, ready to go to that place. Wasn't it sweet? And no, it wasn't, and this is what really happened. But completely unconscious of heterosexual privilege in the way that most white folks are completely unconscious about white privilege.
Let's do this. Let's have that moment. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to practice talking to our neighbors, especially if you don't know them. That's even better. And I thought we might do two things tonight if there's time. One is we probably want to interrogate, explore, consider this question of what matters more with our panel. But in addition to that, at some point, it would be nice to hear about what matters, like really short images of what matters to you. But let's plan on starting with engaging these folks in a conversation, so short questions. And now you have 60 seconds to rehearse your question with somebody you know right next to you or don't know. Go. Are you all warmed up? Warmed up as in not like jackets, but like ready for the conversation. We have some microphones on two sides of the room. Thank you so much, Kate and Aaron. If you'd like a microphone, signal madly. And students, of course, we want to hear from you. So your voices are so important in this. All right, we have somebody right here with a microphone? Okay, great. Aya.
Hello, hello. Hi. I wrote my question down and I lost it. Okay. To me, both the questions, what matters, and poetry share a common ground of significance, potential, and a room for interpretation. You guys, all as speakers, spoke poetry in your words, both in and out of quotations. So I was wondering if you could answer the question, to you, whose interpretation matters more? The one from the author, who is the one who spoke the words into existence, or the reader, the one who actually listens?
That's an easy answer for me as a literary scholar, sorry.
Yeah,
I hate to do that. One of my great heroes, is, of course, is the French thinker Roland Barthes, right? And he makes a distinction between what he calls writerly text and readerly text. That is to say, works that the author's intentionality is so right on your face that it's hard to not get the message and the things. But the great texts that he loves are what he calls readerly texts. Texts that do not position you as consumer of something, but as producer of something. So I think great literature, and especially poetry. Poetry is always, as I'm a professor of literature, but trust me, when people read to me poetry, I don't understand exactly what it is. I don't understand in a good way, in a sense that I am sort of made to kind of produce that meaning by interpreting it. So I think I would always say reader matters, the person who sees. And there's lots of literature about this. The famous Roland Barthes, of course, had an essay on the death of the author, right? And so did other thinkers like Michel Foucault, who talk about, really authorial intentionality. We have already dealt with that. That is, authorial intentionality is ultimately not what makes great literature. What makes great literature, and the reason, for example, we keep reading Shakespeare, is because the text is plural. The text has multiple meanings. And depending on when, read that text, in what context, it provides you with all kinds of possibilities. So I said reader as the producer of the text. That's what I would say.
And this very much connects with what you've been saying, Christy, about the completion of the maker to the receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I often, I think that the writer or the poet, obviously there's the labor through which to endeavor to manifest the gift in that form. It's a gift of labor, labored over to manifest. But it endures because of the reader. It endures differently because of the reader or the listener, for that matter. So to me, it's a process of the reader completes the work, or the, and I don't mean reader always verbally, but the reader of the text completes the work by expanding it to have meaning that's held through them. And when you read it out loud, you're creating another form of that gift because you are sharing it. And that makes it expand again. So to me, that is part of the process of things that do matter through these different artistic forms, is to how to make them have motion, to stay in culture in which you can expand, and it expands because you're expanding. If you get my meaning.
I come back to the fluidity of meaning. I've got file drawers and file drawers of articles and poems that I have clipped. Oh God, I love that. And when I look at it, why in the hell did I save this? It means nothing to me now, but once upon a time, or a movie, a favorite movie that, oh my God, I love this. And I thought, what was I seeing? That things change. But yes, it's what it means to me in this moment. Objects, we imbue objects with meaning. My mother-in-law, who's long since passed away, they had a fair amount of money and had everything they wanted. So when birthday, Mother's Day, Christmas, we didn't ever know what to get her. So she collected art glass. So whenever we would be traveling, if you saw some beautiful paperweights, she collected them. And so, we'd be traveling somewhere. Oh, look at that. Carol will love that. We'll buy that. Oh, isn't it special? Isn't it precious? Well, after she died, then 10 years later, my father-in-law died, and then all the stuff was left after it had been winnowed down from nursing home to nursing home into a few boxes, into my brother-in-law's place in upstate Michigan, lives in a single wide on this property with a Tea Party flag. He says, now go through the stuff. And now the beautiful paperweight that, I remember getting that in Venice, is now sitting on a piece of newspaper in the grass in front of this mobile home, and it's just junk. And it's the same object. It would be the same poem. It's the same piece of literature, but now it's crap. And then I swore, I'm never going to buy anything else again. It's just all crap. And we went to some store in Michigan, and I thought, damn it, it's a life force to want something. I saw this little antique thing. So now I've got more crap.
All right, let's hear from somebody else in the audience. Is there a microphone anywhere? Just wave it up in the air if you have one. I can't see. Nobody? Could we get you the mic? Just hang on a second. We're going to run it up to you.
Raw, recent realization I have that all, at least my life or culturally, we look for finding ourselves and our identity, from going to therapy to studying to whatever. What's your identity? Form your identities, your self-identity. And recently I've come to realize that until we each hold on to our identity, there's never going to be connection and real peace, because we have to come to defend it, consciously or unconsciously. As long as it's my identity, I have to defend it. I have to resist opening my mind and my heart to others. And I think it's inevitable. And how to bring the two together? Can we live with no identity? And if we have an identity, do we have to just keep on defending it to, all these wars, I'm right, you're wrong? What, is there a...
I'll jump in. I know I'm a broken record here, but it comes back to both and. When you were talking, I just had a memory that was one of the most profound experiences of losing my identity altogether, and it was sublime. I was a professional dancer as a young man. I went into design business, and in 1984, the Olympics came to LA. And I was one of those people that was going to leave town because it was going to be a nightmare. But I heard this design presentation from the architect and the graphic designer who designed the whole look for the Olympics. And I got so excited. And then I saw an ad for auditions for dancers for the opening ceremonies. I'm coming out of retirement. I'm going to dance in those damn Olympics. And I was first in line. I got interviewed on TV, and I got in the dance corps. Now, there is no way on earth anybody can know or pick you out or say you are a blip of nothing in this sea of humanity. And it was a sublime moment. It can't possibly be about you and your ego at that moment. And there were plenty of dancers there who kind of thought it was and kind of get their note. I thought I was in that number. I should have been in the front. Like anybody can see you or care. Just do your best and go. But I'll tell you, none of you are old enough to remember what that opening ceremonies was like. It was fascinating to be in something that was so huge. Nobody knows how to do this. Nobody knows how to put on an opening ceremonies. And all these people, and everybody was winging it. You'd see, it was quite an exercise. Sit back and just watch people blow up. One night, I think it was dress rehearsal night, they were doing a test of the transportation because they're getting in and out of the Coliseum. We were all supposed to drive our cars to Santa Anita Racetrack, and they were going to use LAUSD school buses to get us to the Coliseum, and then as soon as we were done, whip us back out to Santa Anita. Well, that day went on forever. Our cars are in Santa Anita. The choreographer and the drill team person and the band conductor were all fighting about field time. It's 2 in the morning. We're still there. The buses had gone home. We were all sitting there at the Coliseum at 2 in the morning. Some people, this is outrageous, but I have a dog to feed. I have all of that self-interest stuff. Notice me, I'm different. And just, what are you going to do? So in the end, the very end of the performance part of the ceremonies, the marching band, it's hokey as hell, but made this big map of the United States, continental United States on the field, and everybody who had performed in the opening ceremonies was in the center, and they sing America the Beautiful. More thrilling than the opening night, the opening ceremonies was the dress rehearsal day when there was invited guests there. Everybody was so thrilled. Oh my God, the world is coming to Los Angeles. I'm still choked up about it. And then when we go, America, the audience went out of their minds. It was like, oh my God, this is so exciting. I didn't exist in that moment. I was a part of this big amorphous mass, and it was divine. And at the same time, I'm aware that I'm having this experience where somebody else is pissed off because their car's in Santa Anita, right next to me. So it's a both and thing. My identity matters, my individuality matters, and ultimately surrendering to the big mass is where the real goodies are for me.
For me, I mean, I think that's one way of looking at it. For me, I mean, since we're doing a lot of poetry, I mean, I'm thinking of Walt Whitman, I contain multitude. And I think that's one thing that in terms of one of the dangers, I think, especially as an outsider for me, still I'm, been here over 40 years, is that there is this kind of this identity politics that actually reduces your identity to this one thing. Yeah. And I think that we are all we contain multitudes. Who am I? I'm an English professor, but I'm also a father. I'm a yogi. I can give you a long list of the kind of things that I have. And I think that recognition of that we contain multitude, and sometimes contradictory even.
Yes.
My favorite thinker I've been saying, Roland Barthes, they keep confronting him with all these kind of things that he said in different contexts, and they seem contradictory. And he said, Je ne suis pas contradictoire, je suis dispersé. I'm not contradictory, I'm dispersed. And I think it's the same sort of thing that I think Whitman, in a way, Walt Whitman wants to say. So I think that the way to transcend this kind of an issue that you're raising about identity is to really fundamentally question identity politics, that you contain multitude. Yes, you may be a woman, but you're also this. And I think that seeing that, I think, makes us have a totally different relationship with other people in the world.
I want to just add that I think that resonates with some conversations that we've had earlier about the complexity of being in multiple communities that in some cases, right, contradict one another or seem to exclude one another, and yet you're in multiple communities. I think that that's part of what you're talking about. And this what was really resonant for us as a larger group. I'm conscious of time, and I want to leave opportunity for more questions. Kate, is there somebody over there with a microphone? Yay, great.
Hey, hello. Hey, thank you all for sharing.
Can you speak loudly?
Thank you all for sharing. I was curious if y'all kind of touched on this, but if you could talk about how you go about negotiating what matters and what doesn't matter, or maybe what truly doesn't matter.
Like in our professional lives or personal lives? Or
however you choose, existentially, or like,
That's a great question.
It is.
And I'm terrible at it. So sometimes if you had seen me last night, you'd say he's out of his mind, because I was just trying to update my website and load a video, and I could not make it happen, and I deserve to die, and life is over. There's a part of me somewhere way back here who knows this is an overreaction, but in the moment, it's all over. Don't talk to me. So I'm not good at negotiating that. I heard one of those little memes, somebody said, it's the 5x5 rule. If this will matter in 5 years, if this won't matter in 5 years, I give myself 5 minutes to be upset about it. I'm not good at that at all, but I don't know about anybody else.
I mean, it's a very complicated question, right? This is what I was trying to suggest, that a lot of things matter. But the thing that you have to ask yourself is that, that you have to make a choice. And so attend to those kind of the implications of those choices you make. Yeah, for me, that's the big question. At every moment when I have multiple choices, like what are the consequences if I go this route or that route? Mm-hmm. You know, what if I'm turning right? What if I'm turning left? In the same way that I think when you drive, you know, you have to make the kind of a choice that you don't get to an accident and so on. Mm. So I don't have a really a direct answer, except to kind of, you know, say that, you know, attending to the implication of the choices you make. Mm. It really is what the question finally comes down to, and I can find your answer. And nobody can tell you this is the right choice or the wrong choice. When I was making my decision, I could have been making a really bad choice. It just happens to be that by some accident, I end up in the United States and provided me with the opportunity of becoming a professor in ways that if I had stayed in Iran and became a poet, my dad probably would have been right. I would have been somewhat resentful not being able to afford a living while seeing everybody else is doing so well and so on. You see what I mean? So, and I think that also brings out another element of the accidental. You know, we make choices, and sometimes our choices are good, and sometimes are not good. I don't think
we can always know. Obviously, as Ali is saying, the implications of our choice. We can take a best guess, but ultimately it comes to our own integrity and what we can live with. I see it with patients making decisions. I've had patients who say, I'm not doing chemotherapy, that's poison, it's toxic, I won't put it in my body, I'm going to do acupuncture, I'm going to do herbs, and then the consequences sometimes are really awful or fatal. And can you live with that choice? But yes, I made the choice I had to do at the time because I couldn't take this path. And a lot of times these days oncologists will say, you know, you can try this drug trial or we can do the standard of care, which do you want? How am I supposed to make that choice? You're the doctor. Well, at some point you can make lists, you can ask people, but I just have to, at some point, make a choice, one way or the other, or I don't make a choice. I've had patients too who feel the lump, it's bursting out of their skin, and they still haven't gone to the doctor. I made a choice to do nothing. We can't always know the implications.
I'm gonna talk about it from a, art perspective, because being a curator and putting together programming and working over arcs of time with artists, I am responsible for making certain kinds of choices that fit within various kinds of things around a mission, of the organization that I run, of the expectations of the institution that I obviously work for and with. But I find myself, there was something that I learned when I was in film school. It was from a filmmaker named Frederick Reisman, who would shoot documentaries in like this particular approach to it, very open-ended, and try to not be subjective, although all things are subjective, et cetera, et cetera. Let's just move on from there. But it was this process that was called surrender and catch. And the goal was, or the way that he would practice this, is that he would surrender himself to the subjects that he was working with to make the documentary. He would surrender his worldview so that it was not imposed upon them in order to catch theirs. And when you begin to now lose yourself enough, you can't make the film, you're gonna become part of the community. So that's where the catch really is. How do you catch yourself and come back so that you can utilize that set of skills and your own agency to make visible a community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the ability to surrender on the terms of something else beyond yourself in order to catch, to try to elevate the voice and vantage point of that which is not you through what you're doing. But of course, you become vitally necessary because of what you're doing, and there is that exchange. So when I'm working, curatorially speaking, and believe me, everybody has an opinion about what is the right choice and what is the wrong choice. They vote with their ticket sales or lack thereof. They're either present or they're not present. But across the arc of the kinds of commitments that I'm making, these commitments are with artists in very, very different sets of conditions all over the world or here where the whole world lives in LA, either permanently or temporarily. those are the kinds of things where I have to sit and say, it is not now about my taste. My taste will be imposed upon a public because I have access to broker what will be exposed on a very large stage or in the media, which occasionally, or whatever. So I try to suppress what it is my taste in service to elevate what the vision and authentic view and vantage point of an artist is, what that uniqueness of form is. And I imagine the audiences, which are not one, there's not like Joe Sixpack, one audience. That's an economic model, but it's not what carries a culture forward. I try to make sure that I am presenting and working with, commissioning and supporting the kind of work in which multiple kinds of communities and identities can find their own visibility and connective tissue through the endeavor of what that work was. If you look at it from a purely economic model, these are the kinds of things that are not always going to succeed on those terms, but they succeed ultimately in the exchange of being able to push a culture towards having, something that can expand because something existed. So I will make decisions around things like Mali kora players who in their country of origin right now are not allowed to play music. And the kora is a very ancient instrument that's passed on through apprenticeships, and it is almost like, it's a holy thing. The griots that play this instrument are historically the people who are able, the poets through their instrument, and who can speak to the leader, the king, etc., and say, hey, the public aren't feeling it. You got to hear hear me. So the dictatorship that took over the country pushes now the griots and the kora is outlawed. Why would that matter in Los Angeles, California? Because we are interdependent in terms of how we might find compassion and care. And the only way that that art form will continue moving forward is if they, in exile, are able to stay in motion and practice it with their families and do the apprenticeship. And the only way they're going to be paid is if they're put on a stage. So I have to create the kinds of conditions that allow that to be as valuable as the virtuosity of somebody who has trained their entire life to share that instrument. Whether we're literate in it as an instrument or not is not, to me, I'm not Mali. I'm not from Mali. But I have enough capacity to understand that that choice matters. And that if we understood that that was part of why that choice was there, it would matter to us. As opposed to, come and see one of the world's best kora players. And I swear there will be 50 people there. But come and be part of a way in which heritage and knowledge is exchanged, and that the exile is there to protect a heritage that is being disrupted, and that we might have some way of bending the needle towards that not becoming an extinction. And I can feel that way with dance, and I can feel that way with, opera and everything else. But the choices are not about how do I impose my taste, but how do I collaborate with a public, with audiences, with resources, and with artists in different art forms to make meaning in public together for very existential reasons of matter. Thank you.
As is so often the case, these evenings go very, very quickly. We have just hardly any time, but I want to give you an opportunity to spread some closure, to think about what you'd like to walk away with from this evening. I'd like us to do this before we lose our audience.
Okay.
I fall in love again with complexity and with simplicity at the same time, and the discussion, and still have the courage to show up with an open heart. It's been a thrilling evening, and deeply humbled by these two.
Thank you. Well, I was very moved by the poetic quality of your presentation, and I really sort of embrace how much literature and poetry and art really can deepen and sort of add complexity to our understanding of the world, to really build our critical sense, to be able to make distinctions, to make choices, and so on.
And for me, I had the chance to work with you as students briefly before we did this for about an hour. And again, it's way too short, but I wanted to thank you for saying yes. And I wanted to say that that too is something that matters. One of the things you'll find in the context of your trajectory in your career is that you will have to collect a lot of yeses in order to go to the next step. And the great choreographic gesture is figuring out which yes to get in what order. And I promise you, getting the money is the first not right step. The right step of that will move in different ways. Use your intuition. Keep sharing these kinds of things that we were talking about with each other. Every single one of you ended up saying something that you valued, you shared it, and it created a bond, which is this thing I keep trying to read, and I'm going to do it really damn quick because it's quick, but it's important. This is a book by Lewis Hyde. It's called The Gift, and if you can read it, I encourage you to do so. There's a film that was just made about it as well. But one of the things in this book, and it does matter in relation to what I was saying, but of course I've lost my damn place in this thing. Here it is. It's a history of money. It's the history of currency, and it's a history of other things. And he says, it is the cardinal difference between gift and commodity exchange that a gift establishes a feeling bond between two people, while the sale of a commodity leaves no necessary connection. Therefore, it serves a purpose. To leave no obligation of a connection is something money helps us do. To exchange our capacities, talents, minds, beliefs, and what matters in the pursuit of form is an endeavor to make a gift into human heritage. It will form a bond, and it will stay and accelerate and expand as you stay in motion. So stay in motion.
To staying in motion. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us.